Hi guys, today I'm working on painting a rose in watercolors. I really want to practice this and get better at it. I love the look of it and I love what roses can tell in a story and in a painting. So that is entirely what I made this piece to be. I designed it so that I could get to that rose. I will talk about that. That's going to be one of the main features of this video, but I do actually end up painting the rose at the very end. So if you want to make sure to see me paint that process and talk about the things that I learned about it and some points and tips, then stay tuned for about the second half of this painting video. But let's just jump right in. I do want to talk a bit about how I balanced it with the rest of the painting and how I made sure that it was significant enough in the design. So this is kind of something that I like to really think about when I want to put in a special element in a piece, like the rose in this painting. So when I have something like this, I really want it to stand out, but also connect with the rest of the piece so that it feels like it has a story to it and a purpose and a meaning. And there are so many different ways that you can do that. And I love looking for design ways that I can connect elements like a rose with the other elements in the painting. So a few of the things that I did is that I wanted this character holding a rose, but I wanted to tell more story with that. So eventually, as I'm working on painting her and her skin, I start to add in these little rose thorn scratches. And I have actually really, it's kind of strange, but I have very fond memories of having those because at one of my houses that I used to live in, we had these really beautiful rose bushes and it was my job to take care of them, and I usually got scratched by the rose thorns. And I honestly think that that's one of the elements that makes roses so beautiful, is that balance of this really incredibly beautiful soft flower with these sharp aggressive thorns. So there's features like that where, because I wanted to show a rose and I wanted to show it in this painting, I also wanted to show the duality of what was in that element. So by being able to make sure that eventually I do paint the thorns on the rose, I also want to show the effects of those elsewhere in the painting. And that's something that I love to think through for any special element that I want to put in a painting. I try to think about how do people interact with that thing or that element, and how does it affect the physical world around it, or even beyond the physical world. If there's things that you can think through and realize that something affects other things like the rose and the thorns, then it can help tie together every element into the painting together. And I love looking for things like that, things that are beyond just artistic elements like color or value, things that tie things together in a story. So like always, I wanted to make sure that I did a very thorough color comp for this piece. I wanted to make sure that I knew what colors are going where, but also what their purpose was. So I actually ended up choosing a more fantastical color for the rose itself. I used a lot of references for roses and how the shading and the light happened, and also the colors that you'd find in roses. But ultimately I ended up deciding to go again with a more fantasy rose color. But as I was working on the rest of the piece, I decided, and this is a little bit of a step away because really there are so many different colors in roses, but what I did want to do is I wanted to have some more traditional rose colors in the character, so that I wanted her to feel almost like an embodiment of a rose, and then she also has another rose, if that kind of makes sense. At least it did in my head a little bit. So the colors that I was choosing for the character, I wanted them to be more of this like blush, desaturated, purpley, reddish color. It was this very fine balance of a lot of different paint colors that I mixed together to ultimately get something that I felt represented almost like this old vintage rose color. And then I wanted her hair to be really white and light, kind of like those white roses. Again, I know like there's so many different colors of roses and there's not a particular connection with her hair being white and the white roses, but honestly, I love looking for things like that that can really personalize a piece with myself and my own experiences and the things that I attach to and think about when I look at a piece. I find that when I do that, and when I've talked to other artists, when they do that, when they put themselves more into their pieces like that, even if it's not something that externally you can immediately read, it comes through on the piece in a way. You can feel that there's more intention and more emotion behind it and more of a story. So I love thinking through those things, even if it isn't obvious or clear. And as I was painting her skin, I did want to make sure that I got that blushy, rosy red color really strongly, where you tend to see a little bit more of that rosy color of your blood, honestly, coming through your skin more. So I wanted it really strongly in her fingers and her knuckles a little bit, on those scratches, on her nose, and right around her eyes. Those are areas that I really like to focus it, but I wanted it even more on this one. I wanted her to feel a little bit more like this almost haunted, sickly, pale looking character, and then to have this like more raw, rough feeling look to like her fingers, where it feels a little bit sore and achy, I think. And I got the idea for these like holes in her torso from these ball jointed dolls. I was looking at those for ideas and references, and there's so many beautifully sculpted, fantastical ball jointed dolls, and some of them had this like filigree lace detailing in their bodies where you could see straight through. It was just cut all the way through, and I loved that look. I thought it was really beautiful, and I decided that I felt like the feeling of that really matched with this more haunted feeling that I wanted to have in this painting. So I did really like being able to have this secondary design element that just adds a little bit more to it than just roses and rose influences on the rest of the piece. So finally, it's about time to start talking about working on the rose. I loved this process because it did really help me learn things that I want to do in the future, but this is a process that hopefully I can share a little bit of insight and information on. It's certainly something that I learned a lot in painting this piece, but the first key thing that I knew going into painting this rose is that I wanted to achieve the look of the rose with a lot of glazing and a lot of layers and watercolors. So if you don't know what glazing is just where you create lots of transparent layers on top of each other with your watercolors so that you get this really beautiful luminous look to it. So as you create each layer, it deposits those pigments down, and then if you create another layer on top of it with different pigments, then you are able to see each distinct different pigment that layers through it, but then you can also see through all of those layers, and then it creates a new color altogether. It is a great way to get a lot more, I keep saying luminous, but really I feel like that's the best word for it. It really does make the colors look so glass-like almost. So it's really what makes watercolors really beautiful. So I definitely wanted that for the rose because I wanted that transparent, delicate look to it. There's a lot of different things that I paint also that I really want to get that kind of translucent appearance. Like skin is actually a little bit on the transparent side, so that's one of the areas that I like to build up with a lot of different glazes. And the second key thing, which really probably comes first before the glazing, is that I knew that I wanted to be using references when I did this. I, of course, used references heavily when I was drawing the rose to begin with, but then I also made sure to use it as I was shading the rose. This is always my advice. When you are using and painting something that you're not used to, you always want to know what the actual thing looks like. That way you can adapt it to your own style and the way you want to work with it, but you're not cutting out these details that you don't necessarily know are even there. So I had a lot of references up that I was looking at as I was working through it. I wanted to make sure also that I was looking at references that had the same light source as what I was using in this piece. So the light source in this painting is from upper right hand corner casting down a shadow. So I had to make sure that I was creating shadows on the rose petals from petals above it. So there were certain cast shadows that I would lay down in certain areas and also much softer blends. So that's another key thing I was paying attention to, is seeing where there's going to be a soft shadow where it blends into the light, or other areas where it's more of a cast shadow, and that's where you can kind of see a hard edge, almost like a cell shaded area. And a few things that can help you remember where those areas generally are is if there's an object that's blocking the light and casting a shadow on another object, you're probably going to see a nice sharp edge that's the contour of the object that's blocking the light. So in this piece, if there was a petal, a layer above it blocking the light, then you'll probably see the contour of that petal on the petal below it. So those are the key areas that I'm looking for a really crisp edge on the shadow. But if you're getting a shadow from where the edge or the plane of the petal is actually curving away, so as it like curves underneath towards the root or the base, I guess, of the flower, you might get it to blend into a darker color, into a lighter color where the light is hitting it, and then gradually it doesn't hit it as much, if that makes sense. And that is where you get more of a soft blend into the light and the dark colors that I'm using. And some of the things that I saw in the references that I loved is there's this certain color variation that some flowers had in their petals. So I wanted to include that in my blue flower. I have this really gorgeous purpley pink color that looks great with the blue that I was using. It blends really nicely. So that is one that I would come in and drop into the petal as it was still wet. That way it got this like very soft wet and wet blend, and it created just a little bit of variation in the color so that the whole flower wasn't overall the same color of blue. There were these hints of purples and pinks. And then I also added a few different types of blues into the shadows so that there's a little bit more dimensionality to the blues that I was using. And I do have prints available of Rose Thorn, this painting. I'm actually really happy with how it turned out. I loved the process and I loved painting a rose. I'd love to do more of that and figuring out more plants in the future, but I do have, again, prints of this available. I also have the original painting of Rose Thorn available at my shop. There's a link down in the description if you'd like to check that out. And I also have a link to my Patreon, which I do want to give a huge thank you to all of my supporters over on Patreon. You guys are absolutely amazing. You help me to be able to make more artwork and do videos on this channel, but yes, thank you all so much. And one more quick little announcement, but I will be at Denver. It's not called Denver Comic-Con anymore, but it is Denver Comic-Con at the end of this month from May 31st to June 2nd. So I would love to see some of you guys there, but that's it for today. So I will be back next week with another video. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you then.